How to Speak Smart, a complete guide to intelligent communication. Before we begin our journey together, let me share why this topic matters so profoundly. Every single day, you are judged by how you speak. Whether you're introducing yourself to a new colleague, presenting an idea in a meeting, ordering coffee at your local cafe, or expressing your feelings to someone you care about, your words create an impression. They reveal your intelligence, your confidence, your credibility, and your character. The good news is that speaking smart is not a talent you're born with. It's a skill you can develop, refine, and master with the right guidance and consistent practice. This audiobook is structured into 8 comprehensive chapters, each focusing on a critical dimension of intelligent communication. We'll start by building your foundation with vocabulary and language mastery, then move through the architecture of clear thinking, the psychology of audience awareness, the mechanics of confident delivery, the art of persuasive speaking, the dynamics of conversations and debates, the nuances of nonverbal communication, and finally, advanced techniques that will set you apart as an exceptional communicator. I encourage you to listen actively, take notes when inspiration strikes, and most importantly, practice what you learn. Communication is not a spectator sport. The concepts we discuss will only transform your life when you apply them consistently in real situations. Now, let's begin our first chapter. Chapter 1. Building your vocabulary and language foundation. Let's start with a fundamental truth. Your vocabulary is the toolbox from which you build every sentence, every argument, every story you tell. A rich, diverse vocabulary doesn't just make you sound smarter. It gives you precision, the ability to express exactly what you mean without ambiguity or confusion. It provides nuance, allowing you to capture subtle distinctions that others might miss. And it offers flexibility, enabling you to adapt your language to any audience or situation. Many people mistakenly believe that speaking smart means using the biggest, most complex words possible. They think that peppering their speech with obscure terminology will make them sound intelligent. This is not only wrong, but it's counterproductive. The smartest communicators use sophisticated vocabulary when it adds clarity and precision, not to show off. They understand that true intelligence lies in making complex ideas accessible, not in making simple ideas sound complicated. So how do you build a vocabulary that serves you well? Let's explore several evidence-based strategies that actually work. First, become a voracious reader. There is simply no substitute for regular reading when it comes to vocabulary development. But here's the key. You need to read widely and strategically. Read quality newspapers and magazines that cover topics beyond your immediate expertise. Read well-written fiction that exposes you to rich, descriptive language. Read nonfiction books in fields that challenge you intellectually. Read essays, articles, and long-form journalism that demonstrates excellent writing. When you encounter an unfamiliar word, don't skip over it. This is where most people fail in vocabulary building. They see a word they don't know, make a vague guess about its meaning from context, and move on. Instead, mark it. Look it up immediately if possible, and write down both the definition and the sentence in which you found it. Context is crucial because words often have multiple meanings, and seeing how skilled writers use them teaches you proper application. Second, practice. Active vocabulary learning with a systematic approach. Choose 5 to 10 new words each week that you genuinely want to incorporate into your speech. Write them on index cards or in a digital app. On one side, write the word. On the other side, write the definition, the pronunciation guide, a sample sentence, and perhaps a synonym or antonym. Review these cards daily. But here's what most vocabulary guides don't tell you. You must use these words in conversation and writing within 48 hours of learning them, or they'll never stick. Force yourself to incorporate them naturally into emails, discussions, and presentations. Third, understand the building blocks of language. English draws heavily from Latin and Greek roots. When you learn that the Latin root bene means good or well, suddenly you understand benevolent, beneficial, benefactor, and benediction. When you know that the Greek root phil means love, you can decode philosophy, philanthropy, and bibliophile. Learning just 50 common roots, prefixes, and suffixes will unlock the meaning of thousands of words. This is exponential learning, where a small investment yields massive returns. Fourth, pay attention to precise word choice. English is remarkably rich in synonyms, but synonyms are rarely exact equivalents. Consider the difference between happy, joyful, content, elated, and euphoric. Each carries different intensity and connotation. Smart speakers choose words deliberately. They don't say something is good when they mean it's exemplary. They don't say someone is sad when they mean melancholic or despondent. This precision makes your meaning crystal clear and demonstrates sophisticated thinking. Fifth, learn words in clusters and semantic networks. Our brains don't store information in isolation. They create connections and associations. When you learn the word gregarious, also learn its synonyms like sociable and outgoing, its antonyms like introverted and reserved, related words like gregariousness, and the context in which you'd use it. This networked learning creates multiple retrieval paths in your memory, making words much easier to recall when you need them. Sixth, embrace the power of active listening. Pay attention to how articulate speakers use language. Watch quality interviews, listen to eloquent podcasts, attend lectures or presentations by skilled communicators. Don't just passively hear their words. Actively notice their vocabulary choices. When someone uses a word particularly well, make a mental note or write it down. Model your language after people who communicate exceptionally well. Now, let's address a common concern. Some people worry that using sophisticated vocabulary will make them seem pretentious or disconnected from their audience. This is a valid concern, and the solution lies in calibration. The smartest communicators adjust their vocabulary to their audience and context. When speaking to specialists in your field, technical terminology demonstrates competence. When speaking to a general audience, clarity trumps sophistication. The key is maintaining accessibility while avoiding oversimplification. Here's a practical technique. For every sophisticated word you use, follow it immediately with context that clarifies meaning. For example, instead of simply saying the data is anomalous, you might say the data is anomalous, showing patterns that deviate significantly from what we'd normally expect. This approach allows you to use precise vocabulary while ensuring everyone follows your meaning. You sound smart without alienating anyone. Let's also discuss the importance of eliminating weak language from your speech. Weak language undermines your credibility and makes you sound uncertain even when you're not. Filler words like like, and basically dilute your message. Qualifiers such as kind of, sort of, maybe, possibly, and I think weaken your statements. Hedging phrases like, I'm not sure, but, this might be wrong, but, and I could be mistaken, diminish your authority. Start noticing when you use these verbal crutches. The first step is awareness. Many people don't realize how frequently they rely on filler words until they record themselves speaking or someone points it out. Once you're aware, you can begin replacing these habits. When you feel the urge to say, simply pause instead. A brief silence is far more powerful and professional than a filler word. When you catch yourself about to say, I think, ask whether it's necessary. In most cases, It's implied that you think what you're saying, so you can simply state your point directly. Another critical element of language mastery is understanding connotation versus denotation. Denotation is the literal, dictionary definition of a word. Connotation is the emotional and cultural associations that word carries. Consider these three words: inexpensive, cheap, and economical. They all denote low cost, but their connotations differ dramatically. Inexpensive is neutral, cheap suggests poor quality, and economical implies good value. Smart speakers always consider connotation, choosing words that carry the precise emotional weight they intend. Let's explore the role of concrete versus abstract language. Abstract language deals with concepts, ideas, and generalizations: freedom, justice, success, happiness. Concrete language refers to specific, tangible things you can observe with your senses: the oak tree, the blue sedan, the chocolate cake, the crying child. Both have their place, but smart speakers know that concrete language creates vivid mental images and makes ideas memorable. When you're making an important point, anchor it with concrete examples. Don't just talk about improving efficiency. Talk about reducing report preparation time from 3 hours to 30 minutes. Analogies and metaphors are powerful tools in the smart speaker's arsenal. They help you explain complex ideas by connecting them to familiar concepts. But they must be used skillfully. A weak or mixed metaphor confuses rather than clarifies. A strong metaphor illuminates. When explaining a complex system, you might compare it to something your audience knows well. When describing a process, you might use a journey metaphor. The key is ensuring your comparisons are apt, clear, and consistent. Now I want to address the elephant in the room. Many people fear that expanding their vocabulary will make them lose their authentic voice. They worry they'll sound like someone they're not. This concern is understandable but misguided. Your authentic voice isn't defined by limitation. It's defined by how you think and what you value. As your vocabulary expands, you don't become someone else. You become more fully yourself, with greater capacity to express what you truly mean. Think of vocabulary development like learning to play an instrument. At first, you have a limited range of notes and techniques. As you improve, you can play more complex pieces, but you still bring your unique interpretation and style. The expanded capability doesn't erase your identity, it amplifies it. The same is true with vocabulary. More words give you more options to express your unique perspective, not a script that makes you sound like everyone else. Let me share some practical exercises you can implement immediately. First, the word of the day practice. Each morning, learn one new word. Use it in 3 different sentences throughout the day. Write those sentences down. Review them before bed. This simple habit, practiced consistently, will add more than 350 words to your active vocabulary each year. Second, the synonym challenge. Take common words you use frequently and find 3 more sophisticated synonyms. For example, if you often say very good, find alternatives: excellent, outstanding, exceptional, superior, exemplary. Practice using these alternatives until they feel natural. This expands your expressive range and prevents verbal monotony. Third, the explanation exercise. Choose a complex concept from your work or studies. Explain it out loud as if teaching someone with no background in the subject. Record yourself. Listen back. Notice where you struggled to find the right words. Research better terminology. Try again. This exercise reveals gaps in your vocabulary and gives you focused areas for improvement. Fourth, the reading journal. Keep a notebook where you collect interesting words, phrases, and expressions you encounter in your reading. Don't just list words. Write why they caught your attention, what makes them effective, and how you might use them. Review this journal weekly. This transforms passive reading into active vocabulary acquisition. As we close this chapter, remember that building your vocabulary is a lifelong journey, not a destination. You'll never reach a point where you know all the words you need. Language evolves, your contexts change, and there's always room for greater precision and nuance. Embrace this ongoing development as an exciting aspect of personal growth. The vocabulary foundation we've built in this chapter will support everything we discuss in subsequent chapters. You cannot structure clear arguments without precise language. You cannot adapt to your audience without a flexible vocabulary. You cannot speak confidently if you're constantly searching for words. And you cannot persuade effectively without the right linguistic tools. Commit now to expanding your vocabulary deliberately and systematically. Make it a priority, not something you'll get to eventually. The communicators who stand out are those who can express subtle distinctions, paint vivid pictures with words, and choose exactly the right term for exactly the right moment. That can be you, starting today. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Clear Thinking. Speaking smart begins long before you open your mouth. It begins with how you think. The clarity of your expression is a direct reflection of the clarity of your thoughts. If your thinking is muddled, confused, or disorganized, your speech will be too, regardless of how extensive your vocabulary is or how confident your delivery. This chapter focuses on developing the mental architecture that underlies all intelligent communication. Let's start with a foundational concept: the difference between knowing something and being able to articulate it. Many highly knowledgeable people struggle to communicate their expertise effectively. They have deep understanding, but they cannot translate that understanding into language others can follow. This gap between knowledge and articulation is where many smart people fail to sound smart. The solution lies in structured thinking. Structured thinking means organizing information in your mind according to logical frameworks before you speak. It means seeing the relationships between ideas, identifying the core message you want to convey, and arranging supporting points in a coherent sequence. Let me share several proven frameworks that will transform how you organize your thoughts. The first framework is the pyramid principle. Imagine a pyramid with your main idea at the top and supporting points below it in descending levels of detail. Your communication should always start with the conclusion or main message, then provide the supporting arguments or data that led you to that conclusion. This is counterintuitive for many people who want to walk their audience through their thinking process chronologically. But leading with your conclusion serves your audience better. It gives them a framework for understanding everything that follows. Here's how it works in practice. Imagine you're asked about a recent project. Instead of saying we started by researching the market, then we developed 3 prototypes, then we tested them with focus groups, and we found that prototype B performed best, you would say prototype B is the optimal choice for our market. We reached this conclusion through market research, prototype development, and focus group testing. The second version is clearer, more confident, and more persuasive, even though it contains the same information. The second framework is the rule of 3. Human brains are particularly good at remembering and processing information in groups of 3. When you have multiple points to make, organize them into 3 main categories. If you have more than 3, group them or prioritize them down to 3. This isn't about limiting your content. It's about packaging it in a cognitively friendly format. Think about famous examples: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, stop, drop, and roll. The pattern of three is powerful and memorable. The third framework is problem solution benefit. This structure is particularly effective when you're proposing an idea or trying to persuade someone. First, clearly define the problem, making sure your audience understands why it matters. Second, present your solution, explaining how it addresses the problem. Third, describe the benefits that will result from implementing your solution. This framework creates a logical flow that's easy to follow and inherently persuasive. The fourth framework is chronological organization. When telling a story, describing a process, or explaining how something developed over time, chronological order is often most appropriate. But even within a chronological framework, you can enhance clarity. Start by giving your audience the timeline up front. Say, over the next 5 minutes, I'll walk you through the 3 phases of this project: planning, execution, and evaluation. This roadmap helps listeners follow along and anticipate what's coming. The fifth framework is the compare and contrast structure. When evaluating options or analyzing situations, explicitly organizing your thoughts around similarities and differences creates clarity. You might say, Option A and Option B both address our core need for increased efficiency. However, they differ in 3 key ways: implementation time, cost, and long-term scalability. Then systematically walk through each difference. This structure helps your audience make informed decisions based on your analysis. Now let's discuss the critical skill of identifying and articulating your core message. Every communication, whether a 5-minute conversation or a 50-minute presentation, should have one central idea you want your audience to remember. This is your core message, your main point, your thesis. Everything else you say should support, explain, or exemplify this central idea. Many people fail at this because they try to communicate too much at once. They want to share every interesting fact, every relevant detail, every tangential observation. The result is information overload, where the audience retains little because they were given too much. Smart speakers are disciplined. They ask themselves, if my audience remembers only one thing from this communication, what should it be? Then they build everything around that single clear message. Here's a practical technique for identifying your core message. Complete this sentence before any important communication. The one thing I want them to understand is blank. Fill in that blank as specifically as possible. Not, I want them to understand the project, but I want them to understand that this project will reduce costs by 30% while maintaining quality. That specificity forces clarity in your own mind, which naturally leads to clarity in your expression. Once you have your core message, every other point you make should clearly connect to it. Ask yourself, does this example support my core message? Does this statistic reinforce my main point? Does this story illustrate my central idea? If the answer is no, eliminate it, no matter how interesting it is. This ruthless editing is what separates rambling speakers from focused, effective communicators. Let's explore the concept of logical reasoning, because speaking smart requires not just organized thinking, but sound thinking. There are 2 primary forms of logical reasoning: deductive and inductive. Deductive reasoning moves from general principles to specific conclusions. If all humans are mortal and Socrates is human, then Socrates is mortal. Inductive reasoning moves from specific observations to general conclusions. I've seen 100 swans, and they were all white, so swans are probably white. Both forms of reasoning are valuable, but you must understand their strengths and limitations. Deductive reasoning, when based on true premises, leads to certain conclusions. Inductive reasoning provides probable conclusions, but can never achieve absolute certainty. Smart speakers know which type of reasoning they're using and don't overstate their conclusions. They say this evidence strongly suggests when using inductive reasoning, not this proves. A crucial aspect of clear thinking is identifying and avoiding logical fallacies. Logical fallacies are errors in reasoning that undermine the validity of your arguments. Let me describe several common fallacies you must avoid if you want to speak intelligently. The ad hominem fallacy attacks the person making an argument rather than addressing the argument itself. Saying, "You can't trust his economic analysis because he's rich," is fallacious. The validity of the analysis should be evaluated on its merits, not the characteristics of the person presenting it. The strawman fallacy involves misrepresenting someone's argument to make it easier to attack. If someone argues for stricter financial regulations and you respond by saying, "My opponent wants to destroy free enterprise," you're attacking a position they didn't actually take. The false dichotomy fallacy presents only two options when more exist. Saying either we adopt this aggressive strategy or we fail ignores the possibility of moderate approaches or alternative strategies. Smart speakers acknowledge the full range of options rather than artificially limiting choices. The appeal to authority fallacy relies on authority figures to support arguments without examining the actual evidence. Just because an expert said something doesn't make it true. Smart speakers say, "According to this expert, and here's why their analysis makes sense," rather than "this expert said it, so it must be true." The slippery slope fallacy suggests that one action will inevitably lead to an extreme outcome without justifying that chain of causation. Saying, "If we allow this small exception, soon we'll have complete chaos," needs supporting evidence for each step in that progression. Understanding these fallacies serves two purposes. First, it helps you avoid them in your own reasoning, making your arguments stronger and more credible. Second, it helps you identify them in others' arguments, allowing you to respond effectively in debates and discussions. When you can spot a logical fallacy, you can address it directly and elevate the quality of discourse. Let's discuss the importance of evidence-based thinking. Smart speakers don't just state opinions, they support their claims with evidence. But not all evidence is created equal. The strength of your argument depends on the quality of your evidence. Strong evidence includes peer-reviewed research, data from reputable sources, expert testimony from qualified authorities, and documented examples. Weak evidence includes anecdotes presented as data, unsourced claims, appeals to common belief, and outdated information. When presenting evidence, smart speakers are transparent about its limitations. They might say, "One study found this result, though it had a small sample size," or "This data is from 5 years ago, so current conditions may differ." This honesty actually increases your credibility because it shows you're thinking critically, not cherry-picking information to support a predetermined conclusion. Another dimension of clear thinking is understanding causation versus correlation. Just because two things occur together doesn't mean one caused the other. Ice cream sales and drowning deaths both increase in summer, but ice cream doesn't cause drowning. Smart speakers are careful to say these factors are correlated when they can't establish causation, and they explain the causal mechanism when they can. Let's explore the concept of mental models, which are frameworks for understanding how things work. Smart thinkers have a rich collection of mental models they can apply to different situations. For example, the concept of opportunity cost from economics helps you evaluate decisions by considering what you're giving up. The concept of feedback loops from systems thinking helps you understand how actions create reactions that amplify or dampen the original action. The concept of incentives helps you predict behavior by understanding what motivates people. The more mental models you acquire, the more sophisticated your thinking becomes. You can analyze situations from multiple angles, recognize patterns others miss, and generate insights that go beyond surface-level observations. Reading widely across disciplines is one of the best ways to acquire diverse mental models. Psychology, economics, biology, physics, history, and philosophy all offer valuable frameworks for understanding the world. Critical to clear thinking is the ability to separate facts from interpretations. Facts are objective, verifiable observations. Interpretations are subjective conclusions drawn from those facts. Saying sales decreased by 15% last quarter is a fact. Saying our strategy is failing is an interpretation. Smart speakers clearly distinguish between the two. They might say, sales decreased by 15%, which could indicate problems with our strategy, or could reflect broader market conditions we need to investigate. This distinction is particularly important when discussing contentious topics. By separating facts from interpretations, you create space for productive discussion. You can disagree about interpretations while agreeing on facts, which allows the conversation to move forward rather than getting stuck in unproductive arguments about basic reality. Let's discuss the skill of anticipating counterarguments. Before presenting an idea, smart thinkers consider, what objections might people raise? What questions will they ask? What concerns will they have? By anticipating these responses, you can address them proactively in your initial presentation. This demonstrates thorough thinking and prevents your arguments from being derailed by predictable objections. Here's a technique. Before any important communication, list 3 to 5 potential counterarguments or questions. Prepare clear, evidence-based responses to each. Decide whether to address them proactively or wait for them to be raised. For major objections, proactively addressing them shows confidence and thoroughness. For minor ones, waiting until they're raised avoids cluttering your message with unnecessary information. The ability to synthesize information from multiple sources is another hallmark of clear thinking. Synthesis means integrating diverse pieces of information into a coherent understanding. It's more than summarizing, it's finding connections, identifying patterns, and generating insights that aren't obvious from any single source. Smart speakers demonstrate synthesis by saying things like, when we combine the findings from this research with the trends we're seeing in our data, it suggests that, or 3 different approaches all point toward a similar conclusion. Let's address a common challenge, thinking on your feet. Sometimes you don't have time for extensive preparation. You're asked an unexpected question in a meeting, or a conversation takes an unforeseen turn. In these moments, having practiced mental frameworks becomes invaluable. You can quickly organize your thoughts using structures like problem, solution, benefit, or the rule of 3. You can draw on mental models to analyze the situation rapidly. You can separate facts from interpretations even under pressure. Here's a valuable technique for thinking on your feet. Buy yourself a moment. When asked a difficult question, you don't need to respond instantly. Say, that's an important question. Let me think about it for a moment. Or, give me a second to organize my thoughts on that. Even a brief pause allows you to structure your response rather than rambling through an unorganized answer. Smart speakers would rather take 3 seconds to think than spend 3 minutes clarifying a confused response. Another technique is the level up, level down approach. If you're asked a question you can't answer at the specific level requested, you can level up to discuss broader principles or level down to discuss specific examples. For instance, if asked about a specific data point you don't remember, you might level up and say, while I don't recall the exact figure, the broader trend we've observed is, or level down and say, I can't quote the precise number, but I can share a specific example that illustrates the pattern. Mental agility, the ability to shift between different types of thinking, is crucial for smart communication. Sometimes you need to think analytically, breaking things down into component parts. Other times, you need to think holistically, seeing the big picture and how everything connects. Sometimes you need to think concretely, focusing on specific details and examples. Other times you need to think abstractly, dealing with concepts and principles. The smartest communicators move fluidly between these modes as the situation requires. Let's discuss the importance of intellectual humility in clear thinking. Intellectual humility means recognizing the limits of your knowledge and being open to new information that might change your mind. Smart speakers say, "Based on the information I have, I believe," rather than presenting every opinion as absolute truth. They say, "I could be wrong, but here's my reasoning," when appropriate. This doesn't weaken their credibility, it strengthens it by showing they're thoughtful rather than dogmatic. As we close this chapter, I want to emphasize that clear thinking is a skill that improves with deliberate practice. Every time you prepare to communicate something important, invest time in organizing your thoughts, using the frameworks we've discussed. Every time you finish a conversation or presentation, reflect on whether your thinking was clear and logical. What could you have structured better? Where did your reasoning have gaps? This reflection is how you improve. The architecture of clear thinking we've built in this chapter is the foundation for everything that follows. You cannot adapt to your audience if you don't first have clear thoughts to adapt. You cannot speak confidently if your thinking is muddled. You cannot persuade effectively if your logic is flawed. And you cannot engage in meaningful dialogue if you haven't thought through your positions carefully. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to take your well-structured thoughts and adapt them to different audiences and contexts. But that adaptation only works when you start with the crystal clear thinking we've developed here. Make this investment in your thinking process, and I promise you'll see dramatic improvements in how smart you sound when you speak. Chapter 3. Understanding and adapting to your audience. You could have the most extensive vocabulary and the clearest thinking in the world, but if you can't connect with your audience, your communication will fail. Speaking smart isn't about demonstrating your intelligence. It's about transferring understanding, changing minds, and inspiring action. This chapter focuses on the critical skill of audience awareness and adaptation. Let's start with a fundamental principle. All communication is audience-centered, not speaker-centered. This might sound obvious, but it's violated constantly. People speak to impress rather than to inform. They talk about what interests them rather than what matters to their listeners. They use terminology that makes sense to them without considering whether it makes sense to others. The result is communication that might be technically accurate but practically ineffective. Smart speakers begin by asking, "Who is my audience?" This isn't a superficial question about demographics. It's a deep inquiry into what your audience knows, what they care about, what concerns they have, what motivates them, and what barriers might prevent them from understanding or accepting your message. Consider knowledge level first. If you're speaking to experts in your field, you can use technical terminology and skip basic explanations. If you're speaking to intelligent people outside your field, you need to explain concepts without being condescending. If you're speaking to a general audience, you must make everything accessible. The smartest communicators calibrate their language and examples to match their audience's knowledge level precisely. Here's where many people go wrong. They either overestimate their audience's knowledge, leading to confusion, or underestimate it, leading to condescension. Both mistakes damage your effectiveness. The solution is to use what I call layered explanations. Start with a clear, simple explanation that anyone can understand. Then add layers of detail and complexity for those who want or need deeper understanding. This approach ensures everyone can follow along while giving knowledgeable audience members the depth they crave. Let's discuss audience interests and values. People pay attention to information that connects to what they care about. If you're presenting a new software system to executives, they care about return on investment, competitive advantage, and strategic alignment. If you're presenting the same system to the people who will use it daily, they care about ease of use, time savings, and how it affects their workflow. The underlying content might be the same, but your emphasis and framing should be dramatically different. This doesn't mean manipulating your message. It means understanding that different aspects of your message matter to different people and highlighting what's relevant to each audience. Smart speakers ask themselves, why should this audience care about what I'm saying? What's in it for them? How does this connect to their priorities and concerns? Cultural awareness is another crucial dimension of audience adaptation. Culture shapes how people communicate, what they consider persuasive, how directly they expect you to speak, and how they interpret various behaviors. If you're speaking to an audience from a culture that values indirect communication, being too blunt might be offensive. If you're speaking to an audience that values directness, being too indirect might be seen as evasive. Neither approach is right or wrong. They're different, and smart communicators adapt. Let's explore emotional state and receptivity. Your audience's emotional state profoundly affects how they receive your message. If people are stressed, anxious, or upset, they'll struggle to process complex information. If they're excited and engaged, they can handle more nuance and detail. If they're skeptical or hostile, you need to build credibility before making your main arguments. Smart speakers read the room and adjust accordingly. Here's a practical technique called the empathy map. Before important communications, map your audience's likely thoughts, feelings, pain points, and goals. What are they probably thinking about your topic? What emotions might they be experiencing? What problems are they trying to solve? What outcomes are they hoping for? This exercise shifts your perspective from what you want to say to what they need to hear. Context matters enormously in audience adaptation. The same person will receive your message differently depending on when, where, and how you deliver it. A casual conversation over coffee allows for different language and structure than a formal presentation in a boardroom. A written message lacks the vocal tone and body language of face-to-face communication, so it requires greater clarity and precision. Smart speakers adjust not just to who their audience is, but to the full context of the communication. Let's discuss the power of common ground. People are more receptive to messages from those they perceive as similar to themselves. This doesn't mean pretending to be someone you're not. It means finding and emphasizing genuine connections. If you share a hometown, an alma mater, a professional background, or a common challenge with your audience, mentioning that connection creates rapport. If you don't share obvious similarities, you can still create common ground by expressing understanding of their perspective and validating their concerns. Here's a technique I call speaking their language. Every profession, industry, and community has its own terminology and ways of expressing ideas. When communicating with a specific group, learn and use their language appropriately. If you're speaking to software developers, use terms like iterate, deploy, and debug. If you're speaking to marketers, reference campaigns, engagement, and conversion. This demonstrates respect and understanding, making your audience more receptive to your message. But there's a critical caveat: don't use jargon incorrectly or superficially. People can immediately tell when someone is using their terminology without truly understanding it. This backfires spectacularly, destroying your credibility. Only use specialized language when you genuinely understand it and when it adds clarity for your specific audience. Storytelling is one of the most powerful tools for audience adaptation. Stories engage emotions, illustrate abstract concepts, and make information memorable. But the key is choosing stories that resonate with your specific audience. If you're speaking to entrepreneurs, share stories of business challenges and innovations. If you're speaking to parents, share stories that illuminate family dynamics. If you're speaking to people facing a particular struggle, share stories of others who overcame similar challenges. The best stories for intelligent communication have several characteristics. They're concise, focused on a single point. They're vivid, with enough sensory detail to create mental images. They're relevant, clearly connecting to your main message. And they're authentic, based on real experiences rather than fabricated for effect. Smart speakers develop a repertoire of stories they can draw on for different audiences and situations. Let's explore the concept of analogies and metaphors for audience adaptation. A good analogy connects something unfamiliar to something your audience already understands. If you're explaining blockchain technology to people unfamiliar with it, you might compare it to a digital ledger that everyone can see, but no one can alter. If you're explaining a complex organizational change to employees, you might compare it to remodeling a house while people are still living in it. The key to effective analogies is choosing comparisons that are familiar to your specific audience. Don't use sports metaphors with an audience that doesn't follow sports. Don't use parenting analogies with an audience of young professionals without children. The analogy that illuminates for one group might confuse another. This is why generic communication advice often fails. It doesn't account for the infinite variation in what different audiences find relatable. Anticipating questions is another crucial aspect of audience awareness. Different audiences will have different concerns and curiosities about your topic. Executives will ask about costs and strategic implications. Technical experts will ask about implementation details and potential problems. End users will ask about how it affects their daily work. Smart speakers prepare for the questions their specific audience is likely to raise. Here's a technique. Create an audience question inventory before important communications. List every question your audience might reasonably ask. Prepare clear, concise answers to each. Decide which questions to address proactively in your presentation and which to wait for. This preparation prevents you from being caught off guard and demonstrates thorough thinking. Let's discuss the challenge of communicating with mixed audiences. Sometimes you're speaking to a group with diverse knowledge levels, interests, and perspectives. A team meeting might include executives, technical specialists, and frontline employees. A presentation might include both supporters and skeptics. How do you adapt to everyone simultaneously? The solution is strategic layering and signposting. Provide overview statements that everyone can understand, then signal when you're diving into details for those who need them. You might say, for those less familiar with the technical aspects, the key point is this. For those who want to understand the technical implementation, here are the details. This approach respects everyone's needs without boring the knowledgeable or confusing the uninitiated. Another technique for mixed audiences is the multiple entry points approach. Structure your communication so different audience members can engage with different aspects. You might lead with the strategic vision for executives, then discuss operational details for managers, then address practical implications for staff. By clearly marking these sections, you allow each group to pay particular attention to what matters most to them while still getting the full picture. Reading verbal and nonverbal feedback during communication is essential for real-time adaptation. Are people nodding and understanding or looking confused? Are they leaning forward with interest or checking their phones? Are they asking clarifying questions or challenging your assumptions? Smart speakers monitor these signals constantly and adjust on the fly. When you notice confusion, you might say, "Let me explain that differently," and provide a new example or analogy. When you sense skepticism, you might address it directly. Some of you might be thinking this sounds too good to be true. Let me share the evidence that convinced me. When you see engagement, you might provide additional depth. This dynamic adjustment is what separates good communicators from great ones. Let's explore the concept of persuasive appeals, which relate directly to audience adaptation. The ancient Greeks identified three modes of persuasion: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is credibility, establishing why the audience should trust you. Pathos is emotional connection, engaging the audience's feelings. Logos is logical argument, appealing to reason. Different audiences respond more strongly to different appeals. Academic audiences typically prioritize logos. They want to see your evidence, examine your methodology, and evaluate your reasoning. Business audiences often respond to a combination of logos and ethos. They want sound reasoning, but they also want to know you have relevant experience and credibility. Community audiences often respond strongly to pathos. They want to know you understand and care about their concerns and experiences. The smartest communicators use all three appeals, but they emphasize the ones that resonate most with their specific audience. For a technical audience, you might spend 80% of your time on logical arguments and data, with brief attention to credibility and emotional relevance. For a community audience, you might spend more time on stories that create emotional connection while still providing logical support for your position. Timing is another often overlooked aspect of audience adaptation. The same message delivered at different times can have dramatically different effects. If you're proposing a new initiative immediately after the team completed an exhausting project, they'll be less receptive than if you wait until they've recovered. If you're sharing concerning news, doing it on Friday afternoon before a weekend is less considerate than doing it early in the week when people can discuss and process it. Pay attention to broader timing as well. Are there organizational changes, industry developments, or world events that affect how your audience will receive your message? Smart speakers consider these contextual factors and either time their communications strategically or explicitly acknowledge relevant context in their message. Let's discuss the art of framing, which is how you present information to influence how it's perceived. The same facts can be framed in different ways depending on your audience's values and concerns. Imagine proposing a new workplace policy. You could frame it as protecting employee well-being, reducing legal liability, improving productivity, or enhancing our reputation as an employer of choice. All might be true, but different audiences will respond to different frames. To choose effective frames, you must understand what your audience values. If they prioritize financial performance, frame your proposal in terms of cost savings or revenue growth. If they prioritize innovation, frame it in terms of competitive advantage and cutting-edge practices. If they prioritize stability, frame it in terms of risk reduction and proven approaches. This isn't manipulation. It's highlighting the aspects of your message that genuinely matter most to your specific audience. Now let's address a challenging situation: communicating when you and your audience have significantly different perspectives or values. Maybe you're advocating for a controversial position. Maybe you're delivering news your audience doesn't want to hear. Maybe you're trying to change minds on a deeply held belief. In these situations, audience adaptation becomes even more critical. Start by finding values you share, even if you disagree on specific conclusions. If you're arguing for environmental regulations with an audience skeptical of government intervention, find common ground in values like protecting property rights, ensuring economic stability, or preserving natural resources for future generations. Build from shared values toward your position rather than starting with points of disagreement. Use what's called the yes and approach rather than no, but. Instead of directly contradicting your audience's beliefs, acknowledge what's valid in their perspective. then add information or considerations they might not have thought about. I understand the concern about regulatory burden. Business efficiency matters enormously, and we've found approaches that achieve environmental goals while actually reducing costs through efficiency gains. This approach is less threatening than direct contradiction and more likely to open minds. Another technique for difficult audiences is to inoculate against counterarguments. This means addressing opposing viewpoints proactively and respectfully. Some people argue that this approach is too expensive. I understand that concern. Here's why the long-term savings actually outweigh the upfront costs. By acknowledging and addressing counterarguments, you demonstrate intellectual honesty and prevent your audience from dismissing your message because you ignored their concerns. Let's explore the role of questions in audience adaptation. Asking strategic questions serves multiple purposes. It engages your audience actively rather than making them passive recipients. It gives you information about their knowledge, concerns, and receptivity, and it creates dialogue rather than monologue. Smart speakers use questions throughout their communications. Different types of questions serve different purposes. Open-ended questions encourage participation and reveal what's on people's minds. What concerns do you have about this approach? Closed questions check understanding. Does that make sense? Rhetorical questions focus attention on key points. If we could reduce costs by 30% while improving quality, why wouldn't we do it? The key is choosing question type strategically based on your audience and goals. Let's discuss accessibility, which is about making your communication understandable and usable for all audience members, including those with disabilities, language differences, or other barriers. Smart speakers provide clear visuals for those who are visual learners, but also describe those visuals for those who can't see them well. They speak clearly for those who might have hearing difficulties. They avoid idioms and culture-specific references when speaking to international audiences. This isn't just ethical. It makes your communication more effective for everyone. I want to address the balance between adaptation and authenticity. Some people worry that adapting to their audience means being fake or manipulative. This is a misunderstanding. Authentic adaptation means being genuinely interested in your audience's needs and perspectives, then communicating in ways that respect those needs while staying true to your own values and message. You're not changing what you believe, you're changing how you express it to connect more effectively. Think of it like translation. If you speak English and your audience speaks Spanish, you translate your message into Spanish. You don't change what you're saying, you change the language you use to say it. Audience adaptation is similar. You're translating your message into the language your audience understands, which includes their knowledge level, values, concerns, and communication preferences. Here's a practical exercise for developing audience awareness. After every significant communication, reflect on these questions. Did my audience seem to understand me? What signals suggested understanding or confusion? Did they engage with my message or seem disconnected? What questions did they ask? If I were communicating to this audience again, what would I do differently? This reflective practice develops your intuition for audience adaptation. Another exercise. Practice explaining the same concept to 3 very different audiences. Explain it as you would to a child, to a colleague in your field, and to an intelligent person outside your field. Notice how your language, examples, and emphasis change. This flexibility is what you want to develop for real-world situations where audiences vary widely. As we close this chapter, remember that audience awareness and adaptation is not a soft skill or a nice-to-have. It's absolutely central to speaking smart. You can be brilliant, but if you can't connect with your audience, your brilliance goes nowhere. You can have important insights, but if you can't make them relevant to your listeners, they won't pay attention. You can be right about everything, but if you can't communicate in ways that resonate, you won't change any minds. The time you invest in understanding your audience before you speak will pay enormous dividends. The effort you put into adapting your message to your audience's needs will determine your effectiveness far more than any other factor. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to deliver your well-crafted, well-adapted message with the confidence and presence that makes people want to listen. But remember, confident delivery without audience awareness is just confident noise. The foundation we've built here is what makes everything else work. Chapter 4. Speaking with confidence and authority. You can have brilliant thoughts and perfect audience adaptation, but if you don't sound confident, people won't take you seriously. Confidence in communication isn't about arrogance or certainty about everything. It's about projecting competence, conviction, and self-assurance that makes people trust what you're saying. This chapter explores the vocal, verbal, and mental techniques that create confident, authoritative communication. Let's start by addressing a fundamental truth. Confidence is partially a feeling, but more importantly, it's a behavior. You don't need to feel completely confident to sound confident. In fact, most confident-sounding people experience some nervousness or self-doubt. The difference is that they've learned to exhibit confident behaviors regardless of their internal state. This is empowering because it means you can develop confidence through practice, not by waiting for some magical internal transformation. Your voice is one of your most powerful tools for projecting confidence. Let's explore the key elements of vocal delivery that create authority. First, volume. Confident speakers project their voices so everyone can hear easily. This doesn't mean shouting. It means using enough breath support to speak clearly at a volume appropriate for the space and audience. Quiet, tentative speech signals uncertainty and makes people work to hear you, which they often won't bother to do. Practice speaking from your diaphragm, not just your throat, to achieve strong, supported vocal projection. Second, pace. Confident speakers use a moderate pace with strategic variation. Speaking too quickly signals nervousness and makes you hard to follow. Speaking too slowly can make you sound uncertain or put your audience to sleep. The ideal pace is one where every word is clear, but there's energy and forward momentum. Think of it as conversational but purposeful. Strategic pausing is a powerful confidence technique that most people underuse. When you pause before making an important point, you create anticipation. When you pause after an important point, you give it time to land. When you pause, instead of filling silence with or you sound thoughtful rather than scattered. Many people fear silence, so they fill every moment with sound. Confident speakers embrace silence as a tool. Practice pausing for 2 or 3 seconds when appropriate. It will feel longer to you than to your audience, and it dramatically increases your authority. Third, pitch and intonation. In many cultures, lower pitches are associated with authority and competence. While you can't dramatically change your natural pitch, you can avoid the upward inflection at the end of statements that makes them sound like questions. This uptalk pattern undermines your authority by making declarative statements sound uncertain. Record yourself speaking and listen for this pattern. When you make a statement, your pitch should go down or stay level at the end, not up. Vocal variety, using different pitches, volumes, and paces throughout your speech, keeps people engaged and emphasizes key points. Speaking in a monotone, even if you're saying interesting things, makes you sound boring and makes your content harder to absorb. Think of your voice as a musical instrument. Good speakers use the full range of notes available to them. Fourth, articulation and enunciation. Confident speakers pronounce words clearly and completely. Mumbling, Trailing off at the end of sentences or dropping consonants makes you sound uncertain and hard to understand. This doesn't mean speaking in an artificial, overly formal way. It means giving each word its full value. Practice tongue twisters and read aloud regularly to improve your articulation. Let's move to the language patterns that project confidence. First, use declarative statements rather than qualifiers. Compare these two sentences: "I think this might possibly be the right approach, but I could be wrong," versus "This is the right approach because of these 3 reasons." The second is much more confident. Now, this doesn't mean never admitting uncertainty. When you genuinely don't know something, it's better to say, "I don't have that information, but I'll find out," than to speculate uncertainly. Confidence is about being direct, not about pretending to know things you don't. Active voice creates more confident communication than passive voice. "We made this decision" is stronger than "this decision was made." Active voice clearly identifies who's doing what, which sounds more confident and accountable. Passive voice can be useful when you genuinely don't know who did something or when you want to de-emphasize agency. But it should be the exception, not your default pattern. Confident speakers take ownership of their opinions with phrases like "I believe," "I recommend," or "in my view," followed by a direct statement. This is different from the hedging phrases we discussed earlier like "I think, maybe." The difference is in the clarity and commitment. "I believe we should pursue option A because it aligns with our strategic goals," shows confident ownership. "I think we might want to maybe consider possibly looking at option A," shows uncertain hedging. Let's discuss what psychologists call the confidence-competence loop. When you sound confident, people treat you as competent, which gives you more opportunities to demonstrate actual competence, which builds genuine confidence. This creates a virtuous cycle. Conversely, if you sound uncertain, people give you less credibility, fewer opportunities, which prevents you from building competence and confidence. This is why learning to project confidence even when you don't feel it is so important. It gets the positive cycle started. Body language profoundly affects how confident you sound, even in audio-only situations like phone calls. Your physical posture affects your vocal production. Standing or sitting up straight opens your chest cavity, allowing for better breath support and projection. Slouching compresses your torso and makes your voice sound weaker. Even in phone conversations, many confident speakers stand or maintain excellent posture because they know it affects their vocal delivery. Eye contact, when you're communicating face-to-face, is crucial for confidence. Looking directly at people when you speak to them shows engagement and conviction. Looking away frequently signals discomfort or dishonesty. In group settings, the pattern matters. Confident speakers don't focus on just one person or stare at their notes. They make eye contact with different people throughout the room, holding each person's gaze for a few seconds before moving to the next. Hand gestures can enhance confident communication when used naturally and purposefully. Keeping your hands in your pockets or locked at your sides makes you seem rigid and uncomfortable. Excessive, random gesturing makes you seem nervous. Natural gestures that emphasize your points, illustrate size or direction, or enumerate items make your communication more dynamic and engaging. The key is that gestures should support your message, not distract from it. Let's explore the mental aspects of confidence. Preparation is the foundation of confidence. When you thoroughly know your material, understand your audience, and have anticipated likely questions, you naturally feel and sound more confident. Conversely, trying to sound confident when you're unprepared usually fails because you lack the substance to back up your confident delivery. This is why all the earlier work we've done on clear thinking and audience awareness is so important. It builds the foundation that makes confident delivery possible. Visualization is a powerful technique for building confidence. Before important communications, spend time mentally rehearsing success. Imagine yourself speaking clearly and confidently. Imagine your audience responding positively. Imagine handling questions well. This isn't wishful thinking, it's mental preparation. Athletes have used visualization for decades because it works. Your brain rehearses the neural pathways associated with successful performance, making that performance more likely when the real moment arrives. Reframing nervousness helps tremendously with confidence. Instead of thinking, "I'm so nervous, I'm going to mess this up," think, "I'm experiencing energy and activation that will help me perform well." Physiologically, nervousness and excitement are almost identical. Increased heart rate, heightened alertness, burst of adrenaline. The difference is interpretation. When you label these sensations as excitement rather than anxiety, you harness their energy positively instead of being overwhelmed by them. Another reframing: see communication situations as opportunities rather than threats. If you think this is a chance to share ideas I'm excited about, you'll be more confident than if you think this is a test where I might fail. The reality is the same, but your mental frame dramatically affects your confidence and performance. Let's discuss the importance of starting strong. The first 30 seconds of any communication set the tone. If you start tentatively, with apologies or disclaimers, you put yourself at a disadvantage that's hard to overcome. Confident speakers start with energy and directness. They might open with a provocative question, a compelling statistic, a vivid story, or a clear statement of their main message. They establish their presence immediately. Here's a technique I call the power posing before performance. Research suggests that holding certain postures for a few minutes before high-stakes communication can affect your hormone levels and confidence. Find a private space and stand in an expansive, open posture for 2 minutes. Think of a superhero pose, hands on hips, chest out, taking up space. This isn't about doing the pose during your actual communication. It's about using it before to prime your physiology for confidence. Breathing techniques can calm nervousness and support confident delivery. When you're nervous, your breathing becomes shallow and rapid, which reinforces the anxiety response. Deliberate, deep breathing from your diaphragm activates the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing anxiety and improving vocal quality. Before important communications, take several deep breaths, inhaling for a count of 4, holding for 4, and exhaling for 6. This simple technique can dramatically improve your composure. Let's explore the concept of authentic confidence versus false bravado. Authentic confidence is based on genuine competence, preparation, and self-knowledge. False bravado is a mask that tries to cover insecurity with aggression or superiority. Ironically, false bravado often makes you seem less confident because people sense the phoniness. Authentic confidence includes the ability to say, "I don't know," or "I was wrong" when appropriate. This honesty actually enhances your credibility because it shows you're secure enough to admit limitations. Handling mistakes confidently is a crucial skill. Everyone makes errors, misspeaks, or forgets something. Confident speakers acknowledge mistakes briefly and move on. "Let me correct that," or "I misspoke, what I meant to say is," followed by the correction is all you need. Don't dwell on the error. Apologize repeatedly or make self-deprecating comments. The more attention you draw to a mistake, the more your audience remembers it. Handle it cleanly and continue with confidence. Let's discuss dealing with challenging questions or pushback. Confident speakers welcome questions rather than fearing them. They see questions as opportunities to clarify, provide additional information, and demonstrate expertise. When asked a difficult question, they take a moment to think, then respond directly. If they don't know the answer, they say so clearly and either commit to finding out or acknowledge it's beyond their current knowledge. When facing hostile or aggressive questions, confidence becomes even more important. Don't match aggression with aggression. This makes you look defensive and unprofessional. Instead, remain calm and address the substance of the question while ignoring the hostile tone. You might say, "That's an important concern. Here's what the data shows," and then provide a substantive response. This demonstrates confidence because you're not rattled by hostility. Confident speakers also know when to disagree respectfully. You don't have to agree with everyone to maintain rapport. When you disagree, you can say, "I see it differently, and here's why," or "That's a valid perspective, though I'd add this consideration." This acknowledges the other person's viewpoint while clearly stating your own. Wishy-washy agreement when you don't actually agree undermines your credibility. Let's explore the role of storytelling in projecting confidence. When you tell stories about your experiences, challenges you've overcome, or situations you've handled, you demonstrate competence through concrete examples rather than abstract claims. Instead of saying, "I'm good at problem solving," you tell a brief story about a specific problem you solved. The story does the work of establishing your credibility without you having to explicitly claim it. The stories that project confidence most effectively have several characteristics. They show you taking action rather than being passive. They include specific details that make them believable and vivid. They demonstrate how you handled challenges or learned from mistakes. And they connect clearly to the point you're making in the current conversation. Develop a repertoire of 3 to 5 stories from your own experience that illustrate different competencies, and practice telling them concisely. Another confidence technique is strategic self-disclosure. Sharing appropriate personal information makes you seem approachable and authentic, which paradoxically enhances your authority. If you only ever project perfect competence, people can't relate to you. Occasionally mentioning relevant challenges you've faced or mistakes you've learned from humanizes you while demonstrating growth and self-awareness. The key is strategic. Share things that are resolved and that you learned from, not current insecurities or ongoing problems. Let's discuss the confidence challenge of imposter syndrome, where competent people feel like frauds who will be exposed at any moment. This is remarkably common, especially among high achievers. The solution isn't to wait until imposter syndrome disappears before projecting confidence. The solution is to recognize that feeling uncertain doesn't mean you lack competence. Many extremely confident-sounding people experience these feelings, but have learned to perform confidently regardless. One effective technique for managing imposter syndrome is keeping a confidence file, where you document positive feedback, accomplishments, and evidence of your competence. When you're feeling uncertain, review this file to remind yourself of objective evidence that contradicts the imposter feelings. Another technique is to focus on service rather than evaluation. When you frame communication as helping my audience understand something valuable, rather than being judged on my performance, the focus shifts away from your insecurities. Confident speakers are comfortable with their expertise level. If you're early in your career or new to a topic, you don't need to pretend to be a world expert. You can confidently say, "I've been working in this area for 2 years, and here's what I've learned," or "I'm still developing expertise in this domain, but I can share my current understanding." This honest acknowledgement of where you are in your journey is more confident than false claims of expertise you don't have. Let's explore status and power dynamics in communication. In many interactions, there are status differences, whether formal hierarchical differences, expertise differences, or social differences. Confident communication navigates these dynamics skillfully. When speaking to people with higher status, you don't need to be deferential to the point of weakness. You can be respectful while still being direct and substantive. When speaking to people with lower status, you don't need to emphasize the status difference. Confidence allows you to treat everyone with respect, regardless of relative position. The concept of earned confidence is important. When you've prepared thoroughly, you've earned the right to be confident. When you've developed expertise through study and practice, you've earned the right to speak authoritatively. When you've done the work we discussed in earlier chapters on clear thinking and audience awareness, you've earned the right to feel and sound confident. This isn't arrogance, it's appropriate acknowledgement of the value you bring. Let's discuss confidence in disagreement or debate. Some people become apologetic or conciliatory when faced with opposition. Others become aggressive or dismissive. Neither response is ideal. Confident speakers can disagree strongly while remaining respectful. They focus on ideas rather than personalities. They provide evidence for their positions rather than just asserting opinions. And they remain open to being persuaded by good arguments while maintaining conviction about their own views. A powerful confidence technique is called steel manning rather than straw manning. When someone disagrees with you, the confident response is to restate their argument in its strongest, most charitable form before responding. If I understand correctly, your concern is that this approach might increase short-term costs significantly. That's a legitimate concern. Here's why I believe the long-term benefits justify those costs. This demonstrates confidence because you're engaging with the best version of the opposing argument, not a weak version you can easily dismiss. Confident speakers also use what I call strategic concession. This means acknowledging valid points from opposing arguments. You're absolutely right that implementation will require significant training time. That's a real cost we need to account for. Given that, here's why I still think this approach is optimal. Paradoxically, acknowledging weaknesses or limitations in your position makes you seem more confident and credible, because it shows you've thought carefully and arrived at your conclusion despite considering counterarguments. Let's explore vocal confidence in different communication channels. Phone conversations lack visual cues, so vocal confidence becomes even more important. Video calls add visual elements, but can feel awkward because of the slight delay and lack of natural eye contact. Face-to-face communication provides the full range of verbal and nonverbal tools. Confident communicators adapt to each medium. On the phone, they use slightly more vocal variety to compensate for lack of visual engagement. On video, they look at the camera periodically to simulate eye contact. In person, they use the full range of vocal, verbal, and nonverbal techniques. Written communication requires a different type of competence. You can't use vocal tone or body language, so your word choice and structure carry the full weight. Confident writing is clear, direct, and well organized. It avoids excessive hedging while acknowledging limitations where appropriate. It uses active voice and strong verbs. Many of the principles we've discussed about confident speaking apply to writing as well. Let's address the relationship between confidence and likability. Some people worry that confident communication will make them seem arrogant or unlikable. This is a false dichotomy. True confidence is compatible with warmth and humility. In fact, the most effective communicators combine confidence with approachability. They're secure enough to acknowledge others' contributions, admit their own limitations, and treat everyone with respect. The combination of confidence and warmth is powerful because it shows strength without threat. Here's a practical exercise for building confidence. Record yourself discussing a topic you know well for 5 minutes. Listen back and note areas where you sound confident and areas where you sound uncertain. Pay attention to vocal qualities like pace, volume, and pitch. Notice language patterns like qualifiers and filler words. Then record yourself again discussing the same topic, consciously applying confident vocal and verbal techniques. This before and after comparison shows you what's possible and gives you clear targets for improvement. Another exercise: watch videos of speakers you consider confident and authoritative. Don't just watch passively. Analyze what makes them confident. How do they use their voice? What language patterns do they employ? How do they handle questions? What's their body language like? Then, practice incorporating elements of what they do effectively while maintaining your own authentic style. The mirror technique can also build confidence. Practice important communications in front of a mirror. This allows you to see your facial expressions and body language while speaking. Are you making eye contact or looking away? Do you look engaged or uncomfortable? Is your posture open or closed? This visual feedback helps you adjust nonverbal elements that affect how confident you appear. Let's discuss confidence in high-pressure situations. Job interviews, important presentations, difficult conversations, and confrontations all create pressure that can undermine confidence. The key is having practiced techniques you can rely on when stress is high. This is why we emphasize preparation and rehearsal. Under pressure, you revert to your trained behaviors. If you've practiced confident delivery, you'll default to it even when stressed. If you haven't practiced, you'll default to nervous, uncertain behaviors. A technique called stress inoculation can help. Intentionally practice your important communications under challenging conditions. Practice with distractions, with friends asking tough questions, with tight time limits, or with critical observers. This controlled exposure to challenging conditions builds resilience so that actual high-pressure situations feel manageable by comparison. Confident speakers develop what psychologists call self-efficacy, which is belief in your ability to succeed in specific situations. Self-efficacy is built through several mechanisms. Mastery experiences, where you successfully handle similar situations, build self-efficacy most powerfully. Vicarious experiences, where you observe others successfully handling situations, also help. Social persuasion, where trusted people express confidence in your abilities, contributes as well. And physiological feedback, where you learn to interpret nervousness as preparedness rather than inadequacy, plays a role. As we close this chapter, I want to emphasize that confidence is both a skill and a habit. Like any skill, it improves with practice. Like any habit, it becomes stronger through repetition. Every time you deliberately practice confident communication techniques, you're building neural pathways that make those techniques more automatic. Every time you successfully handle a communication challenge, you're creating evidence that strengthens your confidence for future situations. The confident delivery we've developed in this chapter amplifies everything we've built in previous chapters. Clear thinking delivered uncertainly won't persuade anyone. Perfect audience adaptation undermined by tentative delivery won't connect. But confident delivery, built on the foundation of strong content and audience awareness, creates communication that's truly powerful. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to use that confident delivery in service of persuasion, moving people to think differently or take action.